Hello, and welcome to my channel. In this particular lecture, let's go ahead and discuss about reusability of components. So we have already discussed what exactly a component is, how to create a component, and we have also learned that components are reusable. So let's discuss how exactly components are usable. So React encourages developers to break down the user interface into multiple smaller UI components, and these are exactly what those components are. So up until this point, we have created one component, which is hello.jsx, and this is what that component currently looks like. Now the question is, why exactly do you need to break down your React code into such components? So you just go ahead and write all of your code into this one single application, which is app.jsx. So the reason why we use component in React is because of these specific reasons. So the first reason for using components in React is the modularity of code. So using components makes your application modular, such that you have multiple modules or sections inside of your application, and each component kind of acts like a module, and it provides a specific UI functionality in managing such as application because quite easy. So for example, as your application is comprised of multiple modules, you could manage every single of those modules instead of managing that entire application. So for example, if you take a look at this hello component right here, this hello component only does one thing. It does one shop in you. Just to ensure that this hello component does its job well, and therefore if your application has, let's say, hundreds of components, you just have to manage them individually. The next thing about components, which kind of makes them reusable, is that once you make and you could reuse it anywhere in your code. So for example, let's say you create another component like a button. So obviously, if you're building an application, your app might have multiple buttons. So you could simply create a one button component inside your components folder, and then you could use that button component as many number of times as you want. So we are going to take an example of that by reusing this hello component. But for now, let's discuss the third aspect, why we use components. So the third reason why we use components is testing. Now, as these components are isolated from one another, that means, let's say if one component is not dependent on other components, they could be tested really well. So you could test each single one of the components one by one, and you could ensure that each of the component works well. And if you could ensure that every single component works well, that means your entire React application is going to work absolutely fine. The next reason why we use components is because of abstraction, and by abstraction we simply mean hiding away the ugly details of implementation. So let's see this abstraction live. So if you take a look at this app right here, we have used this hello component right here. The hello component actually has this whole bunch of code right here, and even through it's a simple component, it has this much code. Now imagine that you have a complex button component right here, which has a whole bunch of code inside of it. Now all the complexity of this component is actually hidden by abstraction, because in this app file you just have to go ahead and you just have to call that button component, and this is what the button component simply looks like. So it actually hides away all the complexity, that is how exactly this button is functioning. So all of that is actually abstracted away, and therefore it's highly encouraged that you use components or create multiple components in a React application. Alright, so let's take an example of actually reusing a component. So we don't have such complex component at the moment because we have not covered a lot of React concepts. So this will be one of the most simplest examples you will see of reusing a component. So we already have this component hello.jsx. So we have already used that up over here as well. So if we go back, this is going to be rendered over here. So to keep things simple, I'll simply go ahead and let's change this component's content to something like hello, and let's add some name like coding Sanchar. All right. So now if I go back, it says hello coding Sanchar. That's all fine and good. So let's say I want to say hello multiple times. So in the particular case in this app.jsx, I could simply go ahead and call this hello component multiple times. So if I use the 2 times, as you can see now, again, the same component has been reused, and I don't have to write any other kind of code here. I could paste it as many number of times as you want. And there we go. What this basically does is it takes the code which is returned by the JSX here, and it simply replaces that code over here. So this is how you could reuse a component, by simply defining the component once and then using it as many number of times as you want. But now you might have a question in your mind, and that question is using components this way doesn't make much sense, because what's the point is saying hello to coding Sanchar 5 times? It doesn't make any sense. This would have made much sense if we could say hello to different people here. So that basically means in a component, instead of saying hello coding Sanchar, let's say I want to change the name. Every time, I basically call that particular component. But right now, if you take a look at our component, it is pretty much static. That is, it's always going to say hello coding Sanchar, and it's not going to say anything else. So now the question is, if the component remains static like that, then what's really the point of using that component or reusing that component? You can't reuse a component if your component is static, so you need to make it dynamic, such that you could change the contents of your component. So in the next lecture, let's go ahead and let's learn how exactly a component could be made a dynamic using props. So let's discuss what exactly are props in the next lecture. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you again.